If you Google greatest martial artists right now, you'll find a top 5 that includes both Bruce Lee and Steven Seagal. If that doesn't add up for you either, then you've come to the right place. Today, we celebrate a group of screen icons that have dazzled us with their deadly precision, machine gun speed, and effortless agility. Whether punching their way to revenge or taking on 5 guys with a ladder, there's no denying that this is an elite class. Join us today while we break down the best and the worst martial artists in film. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Best and the Worst, the show where we break down the best and the worst in the film world, whether it's actors, whether it's genres, whether it's directors. And today is a very, very special episode to both of us. I'm Andrew Ghai. Joining me, as always, is my friend and former movie trivia champion of the world, Ben Bateman. It's been 10 years since our favorite movie, Warrior, came out, and it's inspired a great episode, The Best and the Worst Martial Artists in Film. But before we hop into that, Ben, what is the best way to support this podcast?
Once again, thank you guys so much for listening to the show. This is the second episode, and we are so pumped to bring you guys brand new episodes of this show every single week. If you want to support, there's 3 things you can do. Number 1, leave a review. If you guys review the show on the podcast app, you have no idea how helpful it is to the growth of this show. It's what the metrics all look for, interaction, and we love interacting with you guys. We do it on Twitter, on YouTube. Please go and leave us a review. Number 2, rate the show. 5 stars, of course, is preferable, but however you feel about the show is how you feel about the show, so give us that rating. And finally, if you want to get notified about brand new episodes of the show, we have a 3rd awesome one coming your way next week. Hit that subscribe button. It's follow on Spotify, it's subscribe on podcasts. Whatever you do, wherever you listen, hit that button. Those are the 3 things. All right, let's get back to the show.
Now that the business is out of the way, let's get into the business of martial arts. But first, the way that this show works is usually we're inspired by some sort of anniversary. And as I said, Warrior, 2011, Gavin O'Connor, Joel Edgerton, Tom Hardy, Nick Nolte,
Jennifer Morrison,
the greatest film wife in the history of cinema. We are inspired today by the film Warrior, a pretty underrated film. Ben, what's the first thing that you think of when I say Warrior?
You know, I knew you were going to ask me that question because it's on the outline.
It is.
And I had like a lot of different specific answers because I love this movie more than pretty much any movie. What I'm reminded of is that years ago, when you and I were just friends 1 or 2 years, we had the great, just like lucky break of getting to know the guys that made this movie a little bit.
Yeah.
We got to know the writer, Anthony Tambakis. We got to know Gavin O'Connor. It was just by happenstance. And for that reason, for a couple years there, we spent a lot of time around the people that created this movie. And it was already our favorite movie, so it was just like kind of like meeting George Lucas if you're a Star Wars nut.
Yeah.
We couldn't believe it. But I think back to that couple years of our friendship because we were just getting started in podcasting. Years ago, we did this amazing podcast with the guys we just talked about where we literally talked for almost 2 hours about this movie with Gavin and Anthony. That string of memories for me, I think, is the first thing that will come to mind for me whenever I think of this movie because I don't have that relationship to a single other movie in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally our favorite movie of all time, and we get to talk to the people that made it and hear them gush about it the same way that we did. You know, Point Break is your favorite movie of all time. Gladiator is mine, but over the last decade now, Warrior has really taken precedence, and it is definitely, I think, both of our favorite movies of all time. For me, when I think of Warrior, I think of a dark time in my life. I had just gone through a horrible breakup. I was staying on your couch. Yep. I was drinking a bottle of Jameson almost a day, I think, at that point. It was really rough times for Drew. But every single night, I would watch Warrior, and it would make me feel just a little bit better about my life. And I think with that being said, why, right? Like, why does Warrior make you feel that way? And for me, I don't know exactly what it is. It's a combination of, you know, the fighting, getting through, like, you know, training montages always makes you feel good. The love that's in there, the relationships, the great acting, the incredible music, all of these things kind of culminated together. And this also wasn't even the first time I watched Warrior. The first time that you watched Warrior, could you tell it was going to be something special to you?
No, and I can tell you exactly why. It's because when you watch a movie that is about mixed martial arts, because in America, and at that time specifically, we were very close to a time when MMA was represented by like the clothing brand Affliction, and like
sick.
It was like a very, I mean, we at moments in our life we've been kind of bro-y, but like on the 1 to 10 scale, our broiest was a 2 compared to that culture.
Yeah.
You know, those guys who like did MMA and trained on the side, like I knew those guys and they were nice guys, but like the attitudes associated with MMA was something that was kind of a turnoff to me at the time.
Okay.
So when I watched this movie, I was like, okay, I like these actors, I'll give it a chance. And so for me, it felt honestly like a guilty pleasure the first time. I
Really?
thought that I was watching something that I should be a little embarrassed to like as much as I did. It took me a minute to realize how much I actually loved it. Like I was a little embarrassed at how into this movie I was.
And that wasn't just you. It felt like the general public took a few years, and a part of that when we spoke to Anthony and Gavin was about kind of the marketing campaign behind Warrior. I don't know if
Yeah.
it was marketed great, but now when you talk to people about Warrior, if they've seen it, pretty much everyone unanimously is in love with this movie, the same way that we are. And I think what I was trying to maybe put into words before is this entire movie is a walking fist pump moment,
Yeah.
which is something that you and I have coined, trademarked, used for years. What exactly is a fist pump moment?
Well, a fist pump moment is that moment you're watching a movie and something happens and you kind of look around and you're like, number one, I get to finish this movie right now. Like I'm so in this moment, and you want to call your best friend. You want to literally call them and say like, "Hey, have you seen this movie?" And they're like, "No." And you're like, "I don't care. Turn it on right now."
I'm at my own wedding right now, Ben. Why are you not here?
You're like, turn it on. Go to 11:34. You have to see this. Sometimes there's a drink or two involved. Either way, it's such an exciting, just like a vindication of this film you're watching, and that is a fist pump moment. I could not agree with you more. Like, because when I watch this movie, Drew, there are multiple moments, and I've seen this movie, I don't know, 50 times.
Legitimately, at least 50 times.
It's a sports movie, so the outcome is known. I know how this movie ends. I know how each fight ends.
Yep.
But I'll be watching certain fights, and I'll be on the edge of my seat to the point that I'm like gripping the couch. Like, what's gonna happen?
Yep.
That is why this movie is so effective, because every time the fight's over, it is just like,
Yes, I want to watch this movie. I remember the very first time I saw this film. It was in the theaters with my buddy Tom. We were both obsessed with Tom Hardy, and because of Inception, and we went back and watched some of his other stuff. But so we wanted to go see this movie in theaters strictly because of Hardy. And after the very first Mad Dog Grimes fight, which is like, what, 15, 20 minutes into the movie,
Yeah.
he just destroys this dude.
Yeah.
It is beautifully choreographed. He gets his ass kicked. He's such a douchebag. That kind of energy that you were talking about associated with like the affliction teas and all that, they get the perfect kind of crew of miscreants to support him.
he's got the sweet mohawk.
Yeah, there's
He
just
just
so
gets
many
wrecked.
things that set this up perfectly, and he gets absolutely destroyed. And I fist pumped, and I looked over at my buddy, and this was before we'd even created the show.
Yeah.
We'd even created Fist Pump. I looked over at my buddy Tom, and I go, I cannot wait to buy this movie and watch that scene like 10 times in a row.
Yeah.
It was just so freaking awesome. But that's not the only thing about this movie. It's not just the awesome fights, the awesome ass kicking. There's so much heart in this film, and there's a lot of heartbreak in this film as well.
Yeah. I think, it sounds like, because I seem to remember, though, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the first time we ever talked about this movie on a show, it's probably 6 years ago, your fist pump, I think, was that Mad Dog Grimes fight, even back then.
It's got to be.
Yeah.
It's always been my favorite moment of the movie. There's other moments that make me cry. There's other moments that I'll maybe like revisit more often.
Yeah.
But every single time I watch that movie through, that moment always gets me so hyped. It's exactly what you're saying. It happens, you're like, oh my God, there's still like 2 hours left of this movie.
Yeah.
That is such a great thing. It's got to only get better from this. And guys, just to let you know, this is going to be a little different than our other episode, the Gosling episode, because we talked about Drive. It inspired the conversation to get into Ryan Gosling's movies. But since Warrior is so personal and so important to us, we're going to spend maybe just a little bit more time on it. But I think that there's a big part of this film that you and I have kind of looked at over the years. There's something about the execution of cliches in this movie. And a big part of that is the alcoholic dad that was somewhat abusive, right? Nick Nolte kills it in this movie.
He does, and he's, I remember the conversations that you and I had years ago about this movie when it first started to occur to me just how good it actually was. And it was a conversation we were having about the IMDb Top 250. We used to argue about this all the time.
Yeah, we still do.
Because at the time, you swore to me, you were like, if it's on the Top 250, it's a big movie. And I was like, that list is a total load of crap.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know, man. Look at this. Warrior's like number 211. I was like, it's not the 211th best movie of all time.
It's higher.
I was like, this is a stupid list because Warrior's not that good of a movie. I was lying to myself.
You were.
And then I realized, like, I was like, well, I mean, the other movies that are on this list are pretty great movies. Like, if it's on this list, I guess a lot of people must like it. So then I started to look into it. And it's like, oh, Nolte was nominated for a Best Supporting Oscar for his role in this movie as the cliche alcoholic father, because it's not just that, right? That's just one in the long list. You got the alcoholic father, the two sons. And we are going to spoil this movie if you haven't seen it, guys. I highly recommend you watch it.
Yes.
If you haven't already. But the two sons, his two sons, right? The yin and the yang, the good and the evil.
Mm-hmm.
The way even that they approach, another one of the huge ones is that it's the love and the hate. It's love always wins is kind of the
because
theme.
That's what's motivating Brendan Conlon, whereas the other side of it, he's filled with so much hatred. Tom Hardy's character is just carrying this chip on his shoulder, this darkness with him, and you see it from the very opening scene, the way that he talks to his dad, how much hate is actually there between the two of them, how much resentment in general that he has towards everything, towards the military, towards his family, towards his brother. The only person in the movie that he doesn't hate is his mother, who dies of cancer, right? And you never even get to meet her. You just hear about how great she is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really an interesting setup, because as the movie's going, and this is one of the things that I remember talking about with Gavin and Anthony, was you don't really know who the hero is. Even though there's the love and the hate thing, you still don't really know who you're rooting for, because ultimately Tommy is trying to avenge his good friend's death, which is one of the reasons he's so hateful.
And also the hate he carries, it feels justified because of how much he had to go through with his mother dying and his abusive father and moving across the country, like all that stuff. It really hits hard. And this is kind of just like a tangential segue really quickly. When we spoke to Anthony and Gavin, they told us that Nolte was a no-go from the studios. The studios wanted nothing to do with Nolte. He was washed up. No one wants him in movies anymore. He's crazy. And Anthony and Gavin had just set their sights on him. They'd met him a few times. Apparently he fed him some tomatoes or something like that. And they lied to the studios until they were basically shooting, being like, oh, yeah, we got someone. He's going to be great. They're like, well, who? Who is it? And they're like, no, don't worry about it. They're coming in. We'll send you the contract over. You send over the contract. They get to the first day of filming, and guess who's there? Nick Nolte. And he gets an Academy Award nomination for truly my favorite performance in his entire career.
He's a guy who's been around for a long time, but he doesn't have as many notable dramatic performances in the last 20 years as you'd expect for a guy who was so big in his day, in the 70s and the 80s. You kind of, and being confused with Gary Busey by many people for a long time. And this turned out to be one of his most memorable. I mean, I would say that, because I think about Nolte pre-Warrior, and then I think about Nolte post-Warrior. He's in Mandalorian as a voice. He's in Angel Has Fallen. He's in movies, like he's in Gangster Squad.
He sure is.
He's in a lot of movies that I feel like he started getting cast again after this movie.
Of course, because everyone saw how great he actually was. I mean, he is by far and away the best acting performance in this film. Jennifer Morrison, also, when you talk about cliches in film, like, her husband is a guy who has almost died. They always talk about this moment where he's in the hospital and he wakes up, like later on, he doesn't even remember what happened because of how badly he was knocked out. Jennifer Morrison always gives him crap about going back into fighting, but at the end of the day, she's always supporting him. You know, she's sitting there folding laundry or doing stuff at home, and she's waiting for her phone to ring, and then you see that she's silently or slowly watching it in the background, but it's silent, and then you see her there at the actual event, at Sparta. There's so much about this. So we have the alcoholic dad, right? We've got the brothers that end up facing each other in the final tournament. One of them fueled by hate, one of them fueled by love. We've got the absolutely supports you till the end wife, but will still call you on your shit in Jennifer Morrison. We have the unbeatable Russian in Koba.
The great Russian is here. Game over. Call it. Everybody else go home.
I've seen the Russian dude Koba on the TV. You could die. So this is an entire list of cliches, but the moment, one of your favorite moments still to this day, I think, in the film, is the "why are we here" conversation, which happens at the exact same time as the other great cliche in fighting movies, is how much punishment can one man take?
I mean, there's just an endless slew of lines from the announcers that are just incredible.
Good.
How much punishment can one man take? But yes, the Frank Grillo "why are we here" sports speech on an episode of Action Guys a long time ago, 3 years ago probably, that we did. The original Action Guys, not the one that you find on our YouTube channel, but the one at Collider. Which, by the way, if you guys don't know that, we have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Action Industries, and you can actually watch the video version of this show. It premieres every single week. So, but years ago on that episode, we did a top 5 sports movie speeches of all time. And this speech was definitely on the list. The Why Are We Here speech, which is phenomenal. But that motivational speech is the turning point in sports movies, is such a key piece in Miracle and in Creed and in Any Given Sunday. There's a lot of them. And I think this is one that, since this movie has lived on with people, has probably gotten more popular. But I do still think that of all the ones I named, this one's like far and away the lowest on the list. A lot of people don't even know this exists. It's such a good speech.
Why are we here, Brendan? Why are we here? Are we here to win this fight? Are we here to win this fight? You tell me, because if we're not, I will throw in the towel. We will get tested, and then we'll go home. We'll go home, okay? You don't knock him out. You lose the fight. Do you understand me? You don't knock him out. You don't have a home.
Yeah, it's absolutely one of the best speeches. And the best thing about these moments in film and these speeches specifically is it's not that you need to reach outside of yourself and do something or train or, take a steroid or whatever. It's reaching within yourself, right? It's that thing you always see in superhero movies where it's like they fight, and then all of a sudden you have to think really hard and then they fight harder. But this moment, the speech, it hits home so hard as an audience member that you want him to get up and kick his ass.
Yes.
And that's exactly what he does. He beats the unbeatable Russian. And then we get into, of course, as I just mentioned a moment ago, the brothers fighting each other for the $1 million prize, winner take all. That's the way the movie ends, right? It's the two brothers that face off in the ring.
It's probably my favorite 10 minutes in movie history. The ending of this movie. I think it's the single scene in any movie that I can think of that when it happens, like, it gets to that moment and I'm eternally satisfied. And you hit my other one on the head just now, like the Koba fight. That fist bump is an enormous fist bump.
That is yours always when watching this.
I just love it so much. But the final 10 minutes of this movie is like nothing else I can remember watching, really. Like, it's because the rewatchability of it, and we mentioned this a little bit on last week's episode with Ryan Gosling. The rewatchability is such a key factor in what makes the great movies great.
Yeah.
It's the idea that even if you've seen it 100 times, that moment still gets you jazzed. It still gets you just like...
And it hits you in your heart.
Yeah.
The end of it, the combination of the look from Nolte, the performance from Edgerton and Hardy, the music from The National coming in with About Today, all those things culminate to the perfect crescendo in this film, the climax, to just make it beautiful. It is so simple, but so complex at the same time. And so you and I last week with Ryan Gosling, we came up with a thesis statement about Warrior that is going to pertain to the topic at hand, which, in case you guys forgot, we are going to be talking about the greatest martial artists in film. And so when we talked about Warrior, we were wondering how to kind of bridge that gap. And one thing that I've noticed when watching a lot of martial arts movies is they kind of have similar patterns in them, whatever it may be. There's the training montages. A lot of martial arts movies, center around revenge. So I was thinking about that, and they're cliches, they're repeated. Warrior, in my mind, is the greatest execution of cliches in film history. It doesn't do anything new. It does everything that we know and love and is tried and true over the last however many decades of films and fighting movies. It executes it so perfectly that it feels unique in and of itself.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you think about genre to genre, how the formula shapes that genre. I recently on our channel was talking about Respect, the Aretha Franklin biopic that just came out. Mm-hmm. And my issue with the movie was that the formula felt so tired, like music biopics by and large do. And there are some genres that don't feel that way. If you just say to me like a thriller, like thrillers come in all shapes and sizes.
Right.
But when you say sports movie, 90% of them follow the same exact formula.
There's the underdog.
Yeah.
He's got to work through it. He's got some troubles in his life. There's that great moment of hitting the wall but needing to push on through, usually by an inspiring speech.
Yeah, totally. And like it's a toss-up at the end of the movie if the hero wins or gets second honorably, but like the same ending is always there. Mm-hmm. Rocky is the first prestige sports film ever. It's the first one that won Best Picture. So you have others like The Contender, but like Rocky's the one.
Yeah.
And they've all been ripping off Rocky ever since. This rips off Rocky the best. Like this movie takes all of the things that Rocky sort of invented and then that Rocky 2 did and that Rocky 3 did. It takes all of those things and it makes them its own in the most special way. And I think that's why, while using those cliches, it elevates this movie to like a legendary status. I swear to you, I think this movie is going to keep getting better for audiences year after year. But can we just talk about the fact that she's got a flip phone? Like,
yeah, it's old.
It's weird. This movie came out 10 years ago, and I mean, I know it's supposed to be like smaller town family, but
Yep.
I mean, I think I had an iPhone in 2011.
I think most of us had at least smartphones. I think they were really trying to hit home that cliche of how poor their family really was and how bad they really needed it, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Between us, we got 3 jobs, and
Yeah.
they're still going to lose their house. There's so much in this movie. If you guys haven't seen Warrior, go and watch it. It's not really a martial arts movie, though, right? Doesn't it feel much more kind of like a sports drama?
Yeah, but what's crazy about that is there's 2 things. Number one, the reason Grillo was hired for this movie, and the reason Grillo has really had a career in a lot of action movies, is he's a practicing martial artist. Like, Grillo is pretty serious about this stuff. And so I think his addition to the movie, the reason he gets cast is because he has such a close relationship to fighting. But also, the choreographers on this film are incredible because our friends who do martial arts will tell you when you watch this, the movies they're doing in the film, they're very technical and they're great.
Yeah.
But they're not martial artists. That's why this movie doesn't feel like the 2 guys. Well, I should say the 2 main guys, because isn't Rampage? Isn't he one of the fighters?
Yeah. Well, I think he is one of the. I know that Rashad something is one of the announcers, and then Rampage I think is one of the fighters.
He's
and then
the
we
guy
also
who plays
have
Midnight, right?
Yeah, and then we also have Kurt Angle, who's playing Koba.
Yeah.
So they have, the guys that they're training with or fighting against, they are much more trained than Edgerton and Hardy.
Yeah.
Those guys are just pretty damn good actors that go through their choreography really well. Shout out to our boy Fernie Chen, who worked on the movie, who I know helped with that a little bit. It's really impressive when you watch what they do, but it's not a martial arts movie, and they are not martial artists. They're actors.
Correct. And the focus of today's episode that we're going to be getting to in just a moment is the best and the worst martial artists in film.
Yeah.
That's where we are. And so this movie, while amazing, does not feel like any person involved, the stars or even any of the supporting guys, would qualify in the legendary ranks of the people we're going to be talking about.
And so before we get into exactly that and who we're going to be talking about and differentiating why some are the best and why some are the worst, we are going to use our movie science as we always do. But first things first, what is your relationship with martial arts movies?
Well, when I was growing up, I'm 33 years old.
Yes, you are.
When I was growing up, my older brother, who's 9 years older than me, they watched a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, him and his friends in high school. Mm-hmm. So when I was like 8 years old and they were like 17, Lionheart was on in my house, or like Time Cop or Double Impact, and definitely some Seagal stuff.
Yep.
Jackie Chan movies for sure. I went to the theaters and saw Rumble in the Bronx, and I saw Super Cop movies with my dad. And my dad's a martial artist, has been my whole life. So was my mom, up until she was about like 55 or 60. But so that was kind of my relationship to martial arts movies. We didn't watch them all the time, but the era of martial artists that were popular were the commercialized American ones.
Right.
And Jackie Chan was getting popular in America at the time. It was a big deal when Rumble in the Bronx came out.
Yeah, I remember that.
But, the guys that kind of made it happen and popularized martial arts movies, they weren't the ones that I watched as much. So I watched some of the cornball ones. What about you?
So I grew up, my mother is Korean, and she loved martial arts. I took Taekwondo growing up. She thought it was like a really important thing. And she also wouldn't let me watch R-rated movies unless they were martial arts films. So that was kind of my way. I watched Rumble in the Bronx when she wasn't allowing me to watch R-rated movies. I watched everything that you could think of from Bruce Lee because she was obsessed with him. She loved Bruce Lee. That was like her Hollywood crush. And since I was training, I loved martial arts films. I would go to, we would have like sleepovers at we'll just call it dojo so that people all know what I'm talking about. But we would have sleepovers there with all of us, and we'd watch a bunch of martial arts movies, everything classic Jet Li, classic Bruce Lee, classic Jackie Chan. It'd all be dubbed over, all of those things. And I personally grew up loving, watching, looking forward to martial arts movies, and I wanted to be in them. I thought they were the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. But as you and I kind of got into our teens and our 20s, I feel like martial arts kind of maybe was just less popular for a long time.
Well, there's definitely distinct eras of martial arts movies because, first of all, like the classic martial artist that everybody will talk about forever is Bruce Lee.
Yep.
And like the 70s, that's like when Bruce Lee movies were being made. And so that in its time, maybe Sonny Chiba and people like that were the guys that were popular. But it was the late 80s when the guys I'm talking about, Norris in there somewhere. And
I love Chuck Norris.
Jeff Speakman and and you had like Ernie Reyes Jr. and people like that starting to show up in the early 90s. And then you had Van Damme and Seagal and
Snipes.
And Snipes. And so a lot of those guys were getting popular, but that's the bridge to right around the time you're talking about when we were kids, when Jet Li got popular and Jackie Chan was making big American movies. And then you have the next generation of like what feels like legitimate fighters. At least that's how it feels anyway. I don't know if they all are, but
Right.
And that's like what the current era of martial artists have been, but it definitely doesn't feel like it's been one consistent thing. It feels like one opens the door to the next, and that era we're in, that's like when Jet Li was in movies with DMX, and it was very like they were trying to market it towards teenagers, and for me that was a turnoff. I didn't want to watch those movies. A lot of those movies, they didn't feel cool to me. I want to watch Memento, not like Romeo Must Die.
Loved Romeo Must Die. And then now we're in this phase of kind of the next generation or the next wave, and it's funny because we were talking to some people on our Patreon about this. They were saying Donnie Yen and I think Jet Li are the exact same age. I think is what they were saying.
Yeah.
But like Jet Li and Jackie Chan have been popular in America for so much longer. It feels like Donnie Yen is much more of the Iko Uwais and the Tony Jaa generation because of how popular Ip Man got over the last several years. So all that being said, that's our relationship with martial artists. We've talked enough about Warrior. God, I love that movie. What is it that makes a great martial artist in film, right? I think that's the first thing that we kind of need to start breaking down if we're going to get to who's the best and who's the worst martial artist in film.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mention it because the first idea that we had for this episode was the best and the worst martial arts movie.
Yeah.
And what we realized very quickly was that the quality of the movie is usually not reflective of the quality of the necessarily the martial arts or the martial artist.
Yeah.
But the guys that make the most watched movies, the people who are in these movies, they're the ones to pay attention to.
Yes.
Right? The ones who have the careers. That's the thing that we would ultimately find ourselves talking about. And so the first question was like, what is the first thing? It's like, and I think one of the things to pay attention to is, do you believe them? Can they act? Like,
right.
Are they able to be actors? Because we know they can execute the moves, or at least it looks like they can, but can they act?
Right. And it's like that is a huge part of it. Can they act? Because martial arts, and we said this all the time on Action Movie Anatomy, our favorite parts of most action movies are the moments in between the action because it gives stakes to the action. It makes it matter that much more. And I think one of the best examples of a great actor who is a martial artist in film is Jackie Chan. I know it's pretty obvious, but when you go back and you think about all the things that he's done, back to, Rumble in the Bronx is something we've talked about a good amount. He doesn't have to try or reach too far in there. He's kind of just being an action star.
Yeah.
But, you look at what he did with Shanghai Noon, Shanghai Nights, the Rush Hour movies. He's funny. He's got great comic timing. You look back at, like, Legend of Drunken Master and his relationship with his dad in that movie and getting too drunk. All that, it's pretty heartbreaking, and he does a good job of it. When you watch him cry, when you watch him feel guilt, you feel it too. And that's really important because it then makes those earned moments of him fighting that much better. And I think being able to act on film, it seems so obvious, but when you look at a lot of the guys today that are considered martial artists, and I don't want to call any of them out yet, a lot of them aren't really that good of actors.
No, and I also think with Jackie Chan, something that stands out is that a lot of the stuff he was doing was a different, regionally it was a different kind of cinema. The kind of roles that we in America got really familiar with Jackie Chan for were very kid-friendly roles.
Yeah, most of them.
They weren't as violent. They weren't as focused on the stunts, really. I mean, he's a little older, but like the stuff in the 90s and 2000s when he's in kid-friendly movies, it's a different muscle that you have to use. And so I think he's a great example of somebody who can act. Many of the guys can. I think some of the ones who don't bring as much to the table, they don't last. They don't make it as far. I can't remember when we were talking about this, but like great example is Scott Adkins, who he's a great performer. He's a great stunt performer. He's a phenomenal martial artist.
Could kick both of our asses.
Oh my God. Like we did an episode of Action Movie Night, we call it With Avengement, which Jesse V. Johnson, and he's in that movie, and we watched that movie, and he's a phenomenal performer in the movie, but there's like a charisma, I think, that maybe didn't push him into that upper echelon of bankability at the box office. So he never really quite got as popular, at least not yet.
Yeah, and to continue on that train, we'll get into that when we get to the best and the worst, more talking about guys that maybe their acting didn't hold up or maybe was incredible, and that's why they're in the top of the list. I think the next thing that's really, really important is when you watch martial arts movies, They need to be able to execute the technicality of those moves without the assistance of cameras, without the assistance of quick cuts and edits, without a stunt double just popping in and you're like, well, why don't they show his face at all during this? Because the best martial artists, and I'm going to go to someone who's more recent or more contemporary. I mean, Jackie Chan is very famous for breaking every bone in his body. You can see, the bloopers, the outtakes. It's him doing it. And the same thing with, Jet Li, Bruce Lee, all that. But the guy that really kind of took my breath away recently was Tony Jaa. The dude is a specimen, man. And everyone got his name in their minds because of Ong Bak. But when you go and you watch The Protector, and you watch that 4-minute one shot, even earlier in the movie, he's flipping all over the goddamn place, running off the walls, running away from ATVs and motorcycles and flipping all around. But the 4-minute one take, the stamina, the execution, the precision, the technicality, the stamina, like 4 freaking minutes. That guy blew me away.
Yeah, he's like flying off the walls, and you can see what you're talking about, that some of these guys who are supposedly trained fighters, you don't see that. Guys, we literally talked about Warrior a second ago. Great of actors as they are, they're not doing those moves as oneers, with no cuts. There's a 4-minute shot you mentioned of him flying off walls. There's a 4-minute shot of Seagal eating a baked potato in Fire Down Below. I'm kidding, but
riveting 4 minutes.
So I do think that Jaw's a great example of that. I think almost every single guy I should rephrase this. Every non-American martial artist who has gotten popular in America is capable of what you're talking about.
Yes.
In the last 20 years.
Almost in all time, starting with Bruce Lee.
There's an era, it starts in about mid-2000s, and I wonder what you were doing if you remember this, but I was working here in Los Angeles at Meltdown Comics. It's now closed. I was 17 years old. My hair was this long, and there was like a little import DVD shop that was like a pop-up in our store. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the guy's name who ran it, but he would always talk about pirating and how bad of a thing it was, and he sold the real ones. They were import DVDs, and so he was selling Old Boy, and he was selling like Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance.
For Lady Vengeance.
And he was selling like the real import movies, and I believe at the time either Ong Bak or The Protector, one of them was out, so he was selling them, and they would have them on the screen up there, and we'd be watching, and I would see him play on repeat with no sound, but I would be just mesmerized because it was like, this is something that none of the actors who I like, none of the guys that I follow here in the States I'm a fan of can do that. That's different. That's a different animal entirely, and like you can't fake that.
No, and you'll see in movies now a lot, they'll use camera tricks to speed up the slower choreography that they do. When you watch these guys with like swords fighting or spears or bow staffs, whatever it is, no matter how dull those weapons are, that's still going to mess you up if you screw up, right? Yeah. It's still going to hurt really bad. You could take out an eye, you could cut someone, you could, whatever it is. The amount of precision and technicality that they exhibit in all of those movies, it's so important, because when I watch Warrior, I don't sit there and go, man, Edgerton and Hardy, what incredible martial artists. I go, damn, that's a sweet scene. They did a good job editing that. That's good choreography. Whereas regularly you'll watch these classic guys do stuff that you're just like, how on earth? And it's because they put in years and years, decades of training. I think that's number 2 on the list.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that you really can't do it unless you have that. Now, another one, and this is very consistent, I think, with the culture that martial arts films are sort of built around, at least the ones in America, or the ones that got popular in America, I should say. It's this idea of honor. Yeah. There's an honorable sort of likable quality that you have to have. And if you don't have that, you don't really work. Like, a lot of these different guys have it, but like in Ip Man, for instance, Donnie Yen, he's such a likable, honorable man.
He's like a pacifist, too. He doesn't really want to fight.
He gives the rice back after he kicks those people's ass.
Yeah.
Right? He's like, I'm just here about he's like, but you challenged me, so not only am I going to kick your ass, but I'm going to take the rice that was owed to this dead man to his family. Mm-hmm. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there is a sense of honor that I think almost every one of the most popular great martial artists have. Because if they don't, it's like, why am I rooting for you to kick someone's ass?
Right, you're just going to go around wrecking people because you have that ability. And so many times in martial arts movie, you'll hear the cliche, to go back to what we were talking about with Warrior, of like, you don't go out looking for fights. They might come to you and then you have to defend yourself, protect your family, whatever it is. But a martial artist that goes out there and looks for fights just to mess people up, it's a problem. I mean, that's why John Wick was successful, is because they killed his dog, which is why he was able to go on a killing rampage. But then conversely, I didn't really like nobody. Even though I love Odenkirk, I didn't feel like he was an honorable dude. And there's something about that, the honorable likability. And a part of that is just something that you and I have talked about for years, which is movie star charisma. You've got to have that thing that when you are kicking someone's ass, when you are put to the limit, you're like, yeah, I like that guy. I want to see him do this. He deserves it. He's earned this, and he doesn't deserve what has been happening to him. That is what I think is really important.
I think something else that because here's the thing. Not every martial artist that is great in a movie is the hero that's winning. It's not always the guy that you're rooting for. Sometimes it's an anti-hero villain. It's somebody who is fighting for the wrong reasons but still has honor. And I think like a great example of that is like Jet Li. In America, we kind of mostly met him. Like, I remember Lethal Weapon 4.
We all remember Lethal Weapon 4.
He looks like he's sped up compared to those old guys.
Totally. And he's insanely fast, but he's such a bad guy. But at the same time, when you're watching him be a bad guy, you're kind of like, this guy's awesome.
Yeah, right. You're totally rooting for him as the bad guy because he seems to have some sense of honor. And I think, I don't really exactly know like how to even put it into words, but there is like a sort of Shaolin monk, adverse to violence, thematic quality to so many different martial arts movies. Mm-hmm. And I think that sensibility is what you see when we mention honor. It's what you see in most of these guys. Because the idea that you can screw someone up, but you don't want to, you only will if you have to. It's like the same as like when you say to like a cop or a soldier, have you ever fired your gun? And they're like, hey, firing your gun is something serious.
Yeah, exactly.
You would never do it unless you have to. And you're like, I'm rooting for this guy now. As opposed to the cop who's like, of course, I shoot people all the time. You're like, you should die.
Yeah. And like when you talk about anti-heroes and stuff like that, I mean, when you look at like, okay, how about the Raid Redemption? Yayan Ruihan is the bad guy. He's Mad Dog. But you see in that movie, he has numerous opportunities to just kill people with a gun or with a knife, and he always puts it down. That's the other thing about the honorable thing is like, whether it's the good guy or the bad guy, if they have the upper hand with a weapon, you got to drop that down and throw up them fists.
Right.
And whether it's Yayan or whether it's Jet Li, those moments, you're like, he's still an honorable bad guy. Like, he's not going to just take the advantage he has. He's going to go back to his roots, which is fighting. And I love that. I think it's really important. And it's funny because I didn't think it was actually going to be a conversation we had about the villains as well. But Jet Li, Yayan, they do that very well.
Yeah, it's obviously a sensibility that comes from multiple different cultures, whether you're talking Japanese, Chinese, Indonesian, like where martial arts films mostly originated. But we, one movie that we love that is not a martial arts movie but is similar in tone is The Last Samurai. Yeah. And the samurai in that movie, I mean, they are martial artists.
They are so much more honorable than Tom Cruise.
Oh my God, right? Like the whole movie is just like, they have guns and cannons. We don't care. We have horses and swords. Like, we're going to ride our horses to death because this is our culture and this is our honor and that's what matters. And there is a guns versus artistry theme with a lot of these stories.
And that's another thing that I think started to change in the 90s is like you would see guys like Snipes. Snipes is like, I think maybe one of the most classic examples, and actually Seagal, of like someone who you were like, this guy's a great martial artist, but then he'd also shoot people.
Yeah.
And there's just something about that that's a little bit of a disconnect, right? Like, I don't always want to see that, or I don't really ever want to see that. If you know martial arts and you're in a movie, I want you to destroy people with your hands and feet, not with a weapon.
For sure.
Unless it's a sword, because that's always awesome. So the last thing I think that really needs to come into play here, we've been talking about it a lot, they should be physically intimidating, which is funny because almost everyone we've listed and talked about is under 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
Right? It's not really about how big you are. It's about how shredded you are and how insanely deadly you are. And I think Bruce Lee is the perfect example of that in spades. He's got like 2% body fat. You look at him, he's got like 30 abs. And then you go and you look him up and you look at like his world records. He has a lot of martial arts world records to the point where it's like, I know Bruce Lee could kick my ass. I could definitely kick Steven Seagal's ass. I could.
I don't know, man. He eats a lot.
Yeah,
He's got a lot of strength.
Got a lot of chin,
a lot of girth.
Neck. Yeah.
No, I think one of the things that you mentioned that's so incredibly specific to almost every single guy on this list we've talked about so far is that they all look, and in fact this is the case with many of them, in person, like they're very small, slight guys.
Yep.
I never met Bruce Lee, obviously, nor did you. I did meet Tony Jaa once, and he's a pretty small guy.
Yeah.
He's not a big dude. He's like just kind of seems very normal. But when you watch him kick or punch, the same with Bruce Lee, the same with any of these guys. I mean, Bruce Lee specifically.
Yeah, Bruce Lee is a special one. So I'm going to cut you off there really quickly because we pulled this list of world records that he has. He's the only man, at least at the time, to break a 45-kilogram sandbag with a sidekick. He produced 1,600 pounds of force with nunchucks. He could land 9 punches in 1 second, 6 kicks in 1 second. He could do 1,500 push-ups in a row. He could do 400 with one hand, 200 on 2 fingers, 100 on his thumbs. All of these things, and on top of that, he had the same punching power as Muhammad Ali, who was much bigger than he was. That is literally having physical intimidation in spades for a dude that is, I think Bruce Lee was like 5'10".
Could you think you could do 1 push-up on your thumbs?
I didn't even know you could do push-ups on your thumbs. I've heard of like the 2-finger thing, but like your thumbs? No way.
My thumbs would break.
And he was able to kick a 135-pound sandbag 15 feet in the air.
That's so crazy.
It's insane.
Yeah.
So those I think are the things. We got honorable and likable. You've got to be physically intimidating. You have to be able to pull off the technicality, the stunts, whatever it is, the precision, the swords work, the swordsmanship. And then, of course, you do have to be able to act. If you want to be a great martial artist in film, you have to be able to act. So now that you guys know the ground rules, now you know kind of how we're going to be gauging who are the best and who's the worst. This is the moment where, once again, you guys can get involved. Let us know in the comments who you think the best and the worst martial artists are. Tell us what you think. Let us know why you think they're going to be there. And if you get it right, we'll shout you out on next week's show, where we'll also be doing shout outs from our previous episode, the Ryan Gosling episode, because we tried to get 2 episodes up at once to give you guys 2 hours of content talking about the things that we love. So please, for the best and the worst martial artists, let us know down below in the comments. Like I said, if you get it right, we'll shout you out on next week's episode, which is going to be... It's an interesting one, Ben. How did we get to this?
It's an interesting one. We were trying to figure out...
We just wanted to do it. That's
We were trying to figure out a good anniversary to do, and back in 2020, there was a whole bunch of stuff that got posted, conversations, screenings scheduled, anniversaries that happened, that really we were all stuck inside.
Yeah.
So the anniversary theatrical screening you get of a famous movie didn't really happen, and a lot of stuff got missed. So while David Fincher released Mank, which was his latest film, Seven had its 25th anniversary last year.
Yep.
And we decided, because it's such an incredible movie and we love David Fincher so much, let's give it its 25th anniversary 1 year later.
a year late. Why not? It's our show.
And in doing it, because we love Seven, many people love Seven, I still know some people who believe Seven is his best movie.
Really?
I do. I know. I mean, it's a controversial opinion at this point because he's made so many great movies.
Yeah.
I mean, I know some people think Mank is his best movie. That's a stretch.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they won't be on the show.
But we are going to be doing the best and the worst of David Fincher. He, honest to God, is probably my favorite working director today.
I think he is your favorite working director.
Yeah, it's close because there's a few people. I really love Paul Thomas Anderson, but
You really love Antoine Fuqua?
I do love Fuqua. But I really do love Fincher. I mean, you love Fincher too. Like,
I really do. I think he's an incredibly talented dude, and I would love to break down the best and the worst of his filmography, which we're going to do on the show. So next week, guys, we'll shout you out if you call out who the best and worst martial artists, at least according to Ben and myself, and we'll be talking all through David Fincher's filmography, the good and the bad, or maybe the good and the not quite as good.
Tune in for 1 hour of us arguing about whether or not Gone Girl's in the top 3.
That will be a lot of that episode. I know it is. But all right, let's get into it. Let's get into the best and the worst. And this time, instead of going through our choices specifically, let's start with the worst of the worst and work to the best of the best. So maybe not the worst of the worst. We're going to do 3 of each.
Yeah.
Let's start with the best of the worst, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah, the best of the worst. So yeah, there's a lot of options on both sides. One of the things that came to mind for us was, you know, if you make this list, if you're the worst, if you're the best, you're still notable.
Yeah.
We're not going to pick somebody who is just like a day player who showed up as like a supporting bad guy one time or something
Right.
like that. You have to have a career. People have to associate you with martial arts. If you Google
yes.
the best martial artists of all time, probably you'd want to have these people show up in the top 25. Like, it would probably be a list that matters.
I would think so. I would think every single one of the 6 guys that we have are going to be on that list.
Yes. So, number 3, the third worst martial artist of all time.
The best of the worst, if you
in
will.
film. We got Wesley Snipes.
We do have Wesley Snipes, and we talked about him both a little bit, earlier in the episode. I loved Wesley Snipes growing up. I loved Blade. You know how I feel about a certain film that you still haven't watched. Have you still not watched The Art of War? Or you finally did?
No, I mean, only as much as I had. Only as much as I had back in the day, which is like bits and pieces of it.
I loved Wesley Snipes. We covered Demolition Man on the show. I love The Art of War. Blade is great. And there's a reason why he's the best of the worst. So let's talk about why he is the worst by the things that we talked about, which is the first thing is I don't actually think Snipes is a very good actor.
No, he's not. And I mean, Wesley Snipes, honestly, of all of the people we're going to talk about in this 6, he's probably the guy whose movies I watched the most. Like,
yeah,
I watched a lot of Wesley Snipes movies. There was a period of his career where he was very famous. He was in a lot of stuff, whether Passenger 57 or Murder at 1600, or you talk about the Blade movies. I mean, the Blade movies are a big deal. And
absolutely they were.
He has martial arts moves in those movies.
I mean, he does things in the movies. He does things in his entire career that you can tell. I mean, Wesley Snipes has been training, I believe, since he was 12 years old. Yeah. He's a black belt in numerous different martial arts. He's definitely a badass. He's physically intimidating. He definitely kicked my ass. Probably still could.
He almost kicked my ass a few years ago when I interviewed him. He was not happy.
What did you ask him? You're like, who should be in the new Blade? Who should play Blade in the new Blade?
Well, I think it was like the first or second year I was doing interviews. And so I sat down, and it's funny too, because, my voice was a little higher back then. Mm-hmm. I actually was listening to some old interviews from right at the beginning. It's literally me, and I'm like, Mr. Snipes.
I don't remember you sounding like that.
It's like, if you had the opportunity to cast anybody as the next Blade, you could write, produce, direct the film. If you could, who would you cast as Blade? And he's like, I think I'd cast that guy. I think he's in pretty good shape. He's still looks pretty good. Wesley Snipes, I'd cast him. And I was like,
was that the only question you got?
I know it was the last question I asked him. And I was like, okay. He's like, we'll see. We'll see.
You idiot. I'll kill you. But even then, he's kind of hard to take seriously.
Yeah.
6 of you, such nice, tidy uniforms. Oh, I'm so scared. What, you guys don't have sarcasm anymore?
Even when he's trying to be super intimidating, there's just something about Wesley Snipes that doesn't hit the same way as even the guys that we were just talking about that are kind of the more contemporary martial artists in Donnie Yen, Iko Uwais, Yayan, Tony Jaa. Like, Wesley Snipes, he looks a little more robotic in his movements. You can tell he uses a stunt double a handful of times. Now, while he does do some impressive things that show that he is trained, he just doesn't quite hit the same way. But I think that's why he's the best of the worst. I mean, we both loved him growing up, but when you talk about the greatest martial artists in film, it just really doesn't feel like he does justice to how good of a martial artist he probably really was in real life.
Yeah, he's also pretty jacked. He's pretty big and muscular, and so he doesn't look like he moves as fast. When you mentioned robotic, I think he doesn't have the graceful glide. There's a quality that you and I both talked about, and it's the idea that every single martial artist that I think will make our list of the best has one breathtaking sequence at least, if not more than one in their career. Like a sequence of martial arts that you watch on screen and you would watch on YouTube 9 times in a row.
They look like they're weightless.
And there's nothing that Snipes has ever done in his career that has that. He doesn't he's nearly impossible to take seriously, whether he's in The Art of War, Blade. Like, I can take him seriously. I love Wesley Snipes. It's just, as a martial artist in film, when I think of him, he doesn't feel like that's why I'm watching him.
And I think the other reason why he's even on this list, because honestly, it really does sound like we like Wesley Snipes. People might be listening to this and think, are you guys saying the best or the worst right now? Yeah. It's because of how visible he is. This kind of goes back to our Ryan Gosling episode when we talk about rewatchability. This is all about that availability, visibility. He was everywhere. He was in everything. There was just something about him now looking back over time to where he just doesn't feel like he quite makes the cut.
No. He doesn't. He's part of a generation of martial artists that, by and large, didn't have the same impact as the ones before or after.
And during this time when he was making movies, he leaned a lot more, I think, into the action hero than he did the martial artist.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, can you name a Wesley Snipes movie where he's in a fighting tournament, or where he's right? Like the tropes.
The comments are like, I can name 4.
Yeah. Or I mean, we know his filmography pretty well. Like a fighting tournament movie, or a revenge movie where he's just taking people down with his hands and feet. Most of what he's doing,
weapons really involved. I mean, I guess the swordplay and Blade is pretty cool, but yeah.
He's got a gun too.
Yeah, he's got many guns. Yeah.
He does. I mean, he does have some moves, but again, how many things have you seen Wesley Snipes do where it's one take? where it's
Yeah.
not cutting around and you see the sequences.
And also, how many times would you be like, yo, check out this martial arts scene from this movie. It's insane. And then you pull up a Wesley Snipes clip.
To his credit, like him fighting, his hand-to-hand combat in Blade was some of my favorite stuff as a kid.
Oh, I
thought
loved
it was
it.
the coolest thing I'd
He
ever
was
seen.
such a badass.
Yeah, and he's great, and so he does that stuff well. But when we're comparing him to the other visible people, he's 3. There is a number 2, and I think I'm much happier taking shots at our
Let's talk about number 2.
our
Let's
number
do it.
2. Oh God! So Jason Statham,
5'2" Jason Statham.
So let's start with the number 1. Okay, is Jason Statham physically intimidating to you?
So, no. I just made a joke about him being 5'2". I'm pretty sure he's taller than that. I think he's like 5'6" or 5'8".
Something
He's
like
like
that, yeah.
5'8", whatever. You know, that's the same height as like a lot of the other guys on the list that we're going to be talking about in the top, the best.
Yeah.
But in Jason Statham movies, they do that Hollywood thing, the same thing they do with our boy TC legend Tom Cruise. He's on Apple boxes a lot. Or it's shot in a way to where he looks much taller than he actually is. Whereas these other guys that we're talking about, they show them at their actual height just wrecking people.
Yeah.
Jason Statham needs just the camera trick when we were talking about cutting and like fast movement on the camera. I mean, this is like the most classic one where it's like they just made him look taller.
Yeah.
They needed to make him look more physically intimidating because, look, he's yoked. If you go and you look at Jason Statham images on Google, like a lot of them, he's just shredded with like 4% body fat and a 6-pack and like probably could kick our asses easily. No problem.
Oh yeah,
But he's not really that intimidating in my mind.
no. His most like, his most like recognizable characteristic is being like bald and scowling, and like that
does do that.
5'8" bald and scowling is kind of intimidating, but like he's also I don't know, like he's not intimidating in the way that you mentioned, like Bruce Lee is intimidating, where like he just looks like he could wreck me.
Yeah, like I feel like Jason Statham would probably like be a bar fight dude that would beat you up, whereas like Bruce Lee is the dude you'd see in like a martial arts tournament. It just feels different. They feel like a different class of martial artists.
Yeah, I also the Jason Statham movies and roles that I like the most, the ones that I'm like a big fan of, are movies where he takes himself seriously to the point of comedy, like Spy, or movies where he's
Picked up piano at a late age.
yeah, like they're really funny. He's a great comedic actor.
During the threat of an assassination attempt, I appeared convincingly in front of Congress as Barack Obama.
In blackface? That's not appropriate.
Or movies like Snatch and Lock, Stock, where he's really not doing anything to do with martial arts or even really fighting. He's just a regular guy.
Yeah, and
That's his
he's
best
pretty
stuff.
great in those roles. Like you said, those being some of our favorite movies that he's in, none of those are Crank or The Transporter or those movies where Wrath of Man. Even Wrath of Man is, him going back with Guy Ritchie, but it feels like he's much more of like a dude with a gun that does have some training. And like, yeah, I mean, all of his best roles are non-martial arts roles. And when you talk about honorable and likable, I've heard that he's not the nicest dude to work with. I mean, there's a whole section of it on his Wikipedia about how he's just kind of like difficult.
Yeah. I mean, he has some, like, there's some roles I can think of, like Transporter 2. He's got some good sequences.
Yeah.
Homefront, he definitely kicks some people's asses. He like kicks people's asses hand to hand in that movie a lot, which is pretty fun to watch. But again, it's not like martial arts movie kicking people's asses. It's
It's
not
an action movie.
Yeah, it's fast cuts, and it's like, you mentioned this, like when a guy disarms somebody who has a gun in a movie, it's a classic action movie role that these guys in these movies do, and it always looks technical.
It looks awesome.
It always looks like they know what they're doing, but it's not the same thing as like sword fighting or like, again, going back to Donnie Yen, like he punches real fast.
He really does.
That's like a crazy thing to watch. It's a miraculous thing to look at.
And like, he's not flipping all over the place. He's using a stunt double for the most dangerous things that he's doing. So while Jason Statham is incredibly bankable, he's incredibly visible. I'm sure a handful of movies, the ones that we mentioned at least, are very rewatchable, but they're not because he's a martial artist. He's just been kind of sold to us as a martial artist.
It's sort of weird that he got that. Like with Snipes, it makes a little more sense, I think, because he kicks and punches and like he does it in a very technical way, even if it looks clunky. So that, and the fact that he practiced, like that it's well known. But when did Statham, like, why?
It's the same.
How did that happen?
Right, it was like when Liam Neeson became an action star after Taken. It was like, well, that's interesting. I guess that's just who you are now. Statham just is kind of like a somewhat martial art action star because that's just what his career has been built on. I just think when you go and you watch, you're like, I want to watch great martial artists in film. Statham is not the person that you would want to watch, even though he's kind of sold to you as a guy that you have to watch.
Yeah, it is funny, and I definitely think that going back to the thing I said a second ago, like, he doesn't have a single martial arts role to me that is memorable.
Yeah.
That stands out. And that to me is probably the number one reason. But look, neither of these guys hold a candle to our number one.
I actually like Snipes and Statham a good amount.
Yeah.
This last guy, the worst of the worst, the true worst martial artist of all time.
You guys heard this in our intro to the show, that if you Google greatest martial artist of all time, this man's name inexplicably appears in the top 5 on Google. I don't even know how it's possible. The man, of course, the eater of the baked potato himself, Steven Seagal. This guy, when I was growing up, when same age as you, when in my household, if you asked me, like ask 8-year-old me, hey, who are the coolest martial artists in the world? Who are like the fighters, kicking and punching, karate, whatever? What do you think? Here's what I'd say. Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal.
Right?
Those are the 4 names that I know. In my mind, they're equally cool. Lee is the legend, but the other 3, they're all about the same. They could all kick each other's asses equally. That's how I felt about Steven Seagal in like 1996.
How times have changed, right? Like, the dude is not really in great shape. Even in his prime, he was like, I mean, well, I guess in the early 90s, but even by Under Siege, he already didn't really look that physically intimidating, other than the fact that he's like 6'4". He's a big dude. But, like, he's not a great martial artist in those movies. And like, I know he's supposed to be like an Aikido master, but if you watch those videos, they look fake. They look staged. Like, people like run at him and he'll like sneeze and they'll fly across the room or something.
Well, also, like, so there's so many ways to go with this.
So many angles to hit him from.
Number one, I mentioned this. My dad's like a 4th degree black belt in Aikido. He doesn't do it anymore, but like for years he did this, traveled around the world. So I saw a lot of high level, the best in the world Aikido firsthand. It's not an aggressive martial art.
Yeah.
You don't attack people ever. You're supposed to like redirect their, and so some of that when they're training kind of looks like that. But that being his claim to fame, like, it's not the best one to be famous for being good at.
Yeah.
And so that already is a problem. But then, like, there's the fact that it's Aikido and O-Sensei, the man that created Aikido, it's so much more in line with that honorable, like, monk type of stuff where it's, like, peace over violence. But, like, Seagal is famous for being on set being like, nobody can choke me out. Nobody can choke me out.
Oh, my God. If you guys have not heard this story, so when we talk about honorable, another part of it is that Steven Seagal used to just hit his stunt performers in the face or in the body because he thought that he could because he's Steven Seagal. So one time on set, he says to one of his stunt performers, I can't be choked out because I'm an Aikido master, right? That sounds kind of like him.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
And so the guy, and I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head right now, he goes, well, can we put that to a test, Steven? Is that okay? Like, can I try to choke you out? And Steven's like, okay, no problem. And what happens is he puts him in a headlock, he chokes him out, he goes unconscious, and then he shits himself on set.
And then he sexually harasses 3 women. No,
It's like 10 women.
There's so many allegations. It's awful. It's like really, like, he's not honorable in movies or in life.
No, he's the guy that, like, when you look, that was the other thing about martial artists, and like when we talked about it at the very beginning of the show, how I was saying how my mom let me watch martial arts movies when they were rated R. You know, she wanted me to kind of gauge myself after martial artists because it is something that you're supposed to be so honorable in. And Steven Seagal is just the opposite of that. I didn't even know all the horrible things that he's allegedly done. And he's just riddled with them. There's so many things out there, and his stunt performers hated him, his co-stars hated him, the directors hated working with him, and he also did a reality TV show where he was like a sheriff or something. Like, this is not what you do if you're a great martial artist.
Steven Seagal, lawman, and then he's like hangs out with Dennis Rodman in North Korea too. So
yeah, I forgot about that.
But then like also, but he's one of the funniest Google searches as far as what he looks like now.
Oh, yeah.
His crazy, like, he looks orange and like he has no neck anymore, and it looks like he's painted on like this weird goatee thing.
yeah, he's got that sweet goatee.
But he also wears like very like ceremonial,
like
bright
traditional,
red, like
yeah.
like you know, like, I don't even really know how to describe it without being offensive. He wears something that is not befitting to Steven Seagal.
Yeah, he's like always in like a martial arts uniform, no matter where he goes.
Yes.
Like traditional Japanese like ceremonial martial arts gear. So that is our worst of the worst. Steven Seagal is the worst martial artist in film, even though he might be number 4 or whatever when you Google him. Then we're going to go Statham, and then we'll go Wesley Snipes. Now we get to the fun part. Now we get to the best of the best. And, you know, you were talking about that breathtaking moments in movies and in those scenes where you watch them, you're just like, how on earth do you do this? So I think for number 3, I want to come in with a guy that probably a lot of us only heard of in the last several years, which is Tony Jaa. He is incredible. I mean, almost more so maybe just because of how film has advanced and the fact that you don't have to have as big of a camera anymore, whatever all of it is. His stunt work, his aerobatic ability, his gymnastics that he pulls off, him flying all over the place, his 4-minute one takes, and it's all him. You can always see that it's his face flipping around, flying across the room, tossing dudes around. Like, he's so good. I love Tony Jaa, and I feel like he is finally broken through to a point to where we all look at him and go, oh yeah, that dude is one of the best of the best.
Look, I mean, he's really, really famous for a couple franchises, right? The Ong Bak's the most famous.
Yeah.
The Protector's very famous. He shows up in Furious 7, and he's in some other stuff. Like, we talked about, he's in, I think, like that movie Triple Threat, like a couple years ago.
Yep.
You know, he shows up and stuff, but he doesn't have, like, tons of hits. He's not like some of these other guys.
At least not here in the States.
Yeah. But I think what's crazy about Tony Jaa is that he has hang time in the same way that when I was a little kid watching Michael Jordan, I'd be like, I mean, all he's doing is jumping, right? If I jump, I'll probably have at least some, right? I was
4
like,
inches?
Yeah. I was like, he looks like he's floating. Like,
yeah.
But he doesn't look like he's like doing it that crazy. He's just jumping. So when you watch Tony Jaa, it's the same thing. I'm like, how is he in the air long enough to do that?
And it doesn't look like he's got wires on him. And again, you can see his face. He's doing his own stunts. The athleticism is absolutely unreal. He's got his signature flying knee that shows up in almost all of his movies. The dude could wreck us. And I think he's also like 5'8" or whatever, same thing as Statham, but there's just something different about him. When you watch him in movies, you see how technically precise he is. You see how quick he is. You see how well he can take on all these dudes because of his training. And there's just something about this guy. For me, when I look at him now, I go, that guy is one of the greatest martial artists I've ever seen. But one of the things about him is I don't know if he's had many opportunities to be a great actor yet.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably why he comes in at number 3 of our best of the best.
There are people that I think I'd put above him, but I can't discredit how amazing his physical ability it is, and also how engaging the movies are because of that.
Yeah.
There is, like, when I talk about a breathtaking sequence, there's like never short of like 3 to 5 of them in any movie that he's in, because that's what the movie's built around. The movie is built around literally, let's put you in this situation so you can do something crazy.
You just go nuts.
He just like, there's like scenes in, I think it's The Protector, or maybe it's one of the Ong Bak movies, but where he's like running and he will routinely just like run up and backflip off a wall.
Yeah, it's probably in all of them.
It's
he
like
regularly does that.
It's like the easiest move for him, and I'm just like what?
And they don't cut. So you'll see him like run up to a corner. He'll run around the corner and then just do a backflip off of the wall. And it's just impressive stuff. It's like what we used to see Jackie Chan do all the time back in the day. But Tony Jaa, he actually looks more athletic. And then talking about Chan, he said back in the day, I think back when they were trying to cast Rush Hour 3, he said that Tony Jaa is the most well-rounded of all action stars. So he's been on his radar for a very long time.
Yeah. It's incredibly impressive, and he's a guy that, you know, I do feel probably his physical prime is a little bit behind him now.
Really?
I mean, I think his first stuff that he was showing up in was probably 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, even if he was, I don't know exactly how young he was, but I would have to think he couldn't have been that young. I mean, maybe 20 or something like that. But I mean, you know, physical like athletes, like they peak at 28, 29. You're supposed to lose a little bit each year. So if he's getting closer to 40, you know, that's kind of also like when you see him in Furious 7, it feels like what he's doing there is impressive, but not the same way.
No,
it's not.
And they also they kind of have to dumb down how good they are when they're surrounded by other people. It's like when you watch, was it John Wick 3?
Yeah.
And he's fighting against 2 guys that you know would just absolutely destroy him.
Yeah.
But they slow him down. They make him look like they can't fight that well. But even for me watching that, it was distracting because I knew that Keanu Reeves, was the worst martial artist in that room.
Still very impressive that he trains that well, considering.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love Keanu.
He's gonna be 60 pretty soon.
I know. It feels like he's in the middle tier, because it does feel like after the Matrix and after the John Wick series, the franchises, that he actually kind of is a martial artist.
Yeah, agreed.
In film. But I don't think he makes our worst, and he definitely doesn't make our best.
No, definitely not.
So number 2 here, what do you think?
You know, it's close, and I think there's a lot of really strong considerations. The tough thing about this is because we're only doing 3, we're going to leave out some pretty incredible people.
Yeah.
And there's some people that you and I talked about that, like, certain scenes that stand out. I mean, I just watched Ip Man for the first time, which I'm pretty jazzed about that movie. So
good.
I really wanted to include Donnie Yen, but the reality is we would be remiss if we did not make our number 2 Jet Li. And it seems crazy that, like, there's a world in which Jet Li is just number 1 because he's that good.
For sure.
He defined, really other than maybe one name, he defined a whole era of martial arts in, like, my mind. Like, I remember when Black Mask came out. Like, I remember when definitely Unleashed came out. Like, I wasn't as into those movies, but it was undeniable. He was so cool and moved so fast. It was just mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, and the things that he did that was innovative, it was deadly precise. I mean, in Lethal Weapon 4, he goes up against Riggs and Murtaugh, who were supposed to be our heroes, the action stars of the movie, and he is kicking both of their asses at the end, and they just have to do what happens in a lot of American action movies. They just have to overpower him because he is a small guy. It's the only thing when you watch him in American films when he's the bad guy. That's the only way to beat him.
It's the only move, yeah.
They can't be faster than him. If all of a sudden they fight better than him, it would be so unbelievable. But Jet Li has those things that we talked about. He's a great actor. He really is. You can go back to the stuff that wasn't popular in the States that's back in China, or you could go to stuff like Hero and Fearless and also in Lethal Weapon 4 and what he does in, like, Romeo Must Die. Even though it's not a great movie, he's a pretty good actor in everything. He's very, very believable. And he plays evil just as well as he plays good.
Yeah, that's such a crazy turn, right? Because he comes in as the bad guy. We mentioned that earlier. He comes in as the bad guy in Lethal Weapon 4, but then he goes on to have this career as an incredibly likable, incredibly honorable lead who's, and also I think one of the things that is so crazy, he won, like, multiple national fighting tournaments.
Right, Wushu championships back home.
Yeah, like, he's a real, actual, top-level, best of the best in the world level martial artist. And his career dates back pretty far. I mean, if you want to go back and find some of the best Jet Li stuff, as cool as it is to watch Lethal Weapon 4 and as much fun as it is to see the stuff in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it doesn't quite hold a candle to some of the old stuff.
You go back and you watch, like, the ladder fight scene from Once Upon a Time in China, or you watch some of that stuff, and what he's doing is... It feels actually very similar acrobatically to what Tony Jaa does. Mm-hmm. That ladder sequence, like, you see him jumping around, you see him doing crazy backflips and jumping from platform, like almost like parkour, like the parkour stuff. But it's such a long time ago, and it predates the stuff. Like Bruce Lee didn't do stuff like that really. So it feels like it was building on what some of the other legendary names did, and that's why he had such a huge impact, both in his time before he got to America and in the American films that he made.
And you talk about the technicality and being able to execute. There's those numerous scenes where he's blindfolded, sword fighting, blindfolded fighting by hand. And, like, whether you are believing that he's blindfolded or not on set, the execution there is just so sublime. It's so perfect that you just watch him, and he's exactly what we're talking about. It's incredibly graceful, it's incredibly deadly, and it's so freaking believable. That's why Jet Li's our number 2. He's so goddamn good, and he's still sticking around. I mean, he was even in the Expendables, right? I know it's a little different. He's a lot older, but there's credit there. They wanted to bring him in for that reason.
I mean, he and Donnie Yen are in Mulan together. Like, he was just last year. So he's still in movies. Again, he's another guy, because Fearless was his final film that he was going to do that was like a martial arts epic.
God, I love that movie.
I think at that point he was like, I'm going to stop doing this thing, like this over and over thing. And so he's really slowed down in the last 15 years.
You're in his heart, like, he's such a good actor in like Hero and in Fearless. Is like your heart breaks for him, or you want him to win, or whatever it is that the emotion he's supposed to be evoking out of you. Jet Li does it almost better than anyone else on this entire list, which gets us to our best of the best of the best.
Yeah, and I know what you guys are thinking. But there can only be one.
There can only be one.
It's
Jet Li in The One. No.
Our number 1, I know you guys are going to hate us. It's Jackie Chan.
It's Jackie Chan.
And we're going to get to the elephant in the room.
Why isn't Chuck Norris on this list? Why isn't Jean-Claude?
said action, Jean-Claude. I wish sometimes that there were like some of the stories that we told over the years. I wish that we could have like great recordings of when we told them at their best.
Yeah.
Because some of my favorite memories and stories, like the Jean-Claude story that I'm talking about, it's like
Such a good
I don't
one.
remember the story as well as I used to. It's been a long time since we've laughed about it, so it's probably faded. Anyway,
action, Jean-Claude.
that is unrelated. The answer is not Jean-Claude Van Damme. It's Jackie Chan. So,
Yep.
you know, I mentioned it a second ago, but when I was a little kid and my dad was a martial artist, I did Aikido for a few years, like probably from like, I don't know, like around that time, probably like 7 to like 10 or something like that. And so, but that's right around the time Rumble in the Bronx came out. It hit the States in 1995, maybe 96, but it's right in that era. Super Cop came out here. First Strike was around that time, I think,
Yep.
re-released. And it just felt like, to me, when I was watching him, it was not only exciting that he was in America, because he had been around and famous for a long time, but I was watching something I'd never seen before. But the difference between Jackie Chan and so many other people is that when he's fighting, he's doing that, like he's doing those big expressions.
Yeah.
That for a little kid made him so likable, and like he didn't seem dangerous, but he seemed incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, that's a good way to put. Like, he seemed like he was like your uncle that would kick someone's ass if they ever mess with you. He was so great. And then, you know, Legend of Drunken Master is one of my favorite movies ever because he really gets to do that to the utmost. Like,
Yeah.
because he's drunk while he's fighting, he's like goofy, he's laughing, he's like saying out names as he's doing them. And of course, the actual fighting of drunken fighting or drunken boxing, whatever it is really interesting to watch because it does look like you're falling down and using your momentum and using theirs against them. But he's also doing that Jackie Chan thing of the whole time. He's incredibly likable. He's funny. And he's pulling it off. He's pulling off the drunk thing. He's pulling off the guilt. Like, the guilt that he shows in that movie. He's such a good freaking actor. And then you talk about adapting to what he was kind of given as an American superstar. He was perfect at it. Every part of it. He's hilarious in the Rush Hour and Shanghai franchises, but he's also the biggest badass in those movies.
He checks a lot of boxes. I mean, number one, he's the highest grossing martial artist of all time in America, and it's not even close. He has like 4 of the top 10 movies.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the multiple franchises. So the ability to do, because I think the original Drunken Master, I think is like 1978. He's making...
Yeah, it's like that, or 82 or something like that.
Yeah, it's right around that. I mean, he's making martial arts movies really not that far from the time Bruce Lee was making them. Like, he's in Enter the Dragon.
He is. He gets his neck snapped.
Yeah, so he's a martial artist, and like he does that whole stretch of movies in the 80s where, you know, there's the pirate fight. I can't remember what movie it's in, but he's rolling over barrels, and it's just insane to watch.
Yeah.
He gets past that part of his career, and he's like, okay, now I'll go to America, and I'll do my own stunts. And he adapts, and each 5 years or so, he's doing a new thing. So once the time he gets to Rush Hour and Shanghai Noon, not a single other person on this whole list we're talking about ever even had the opportunity to showcase chops, comedic chops like that.
Right. And like, you even go to just a couple years ago when he's in The Foreigner as like a 50-plus-year-old man. You believe it. You still believe. And they don't make him go too crazy there because I bet he still wanted to do a lot of his own stunts. The guy's broken every bone in his body. He's like notorious for that. I mean, we were talking again to the people in our Patreon, and they were talking about moments of like the bloopers in his action movies are some of our favorite parts of martial arts film, period, because you would see him actually doing everything, and he would mess up, or he would hurt himself, or he would fall, and you'd be like, God damn, that's so difficult. Even the best of the best in Jackie Chan can hardly pull off the stuff that he's pulling off, and he's also got over 140 credits. 140 credits.
Yeah, that's an insane thing to think about because filming a martial arts film, when the expectation of him every time is to do stunts and it's to be athletic, it's like being a pro athlete because every time you film a movie, you've got to be in shape, in season, doing all the moves. He did it for like 35 years. Like, he really only slowed down, I would say, maybe 30 years. He really slowed down like around 2010. But I mean, even as late as like The Forbidden Kingdom and movies like that, he's still doing big stuff in the late 2000s. Like, he starts to, he transitions into another phase of his career where he's doing like Kung Fu Panda and the Lego Ninjago movie and things like that in the 2010s. But really up through about that point, he's still a premier martial artist. Like, what he's doing, all the movies he's in, maybe the stuff in The Medallion or The Spy Next Door is not as impressive. But like the Karate Kid remake is 2010. He's doing martial arts in that movie.
Yeah, it's like the number 4 martial arts grossing movie of all time. And the other thing about Jackie Chan is, like, who doesn't love Jackie Chan?
Correct.
Whether it's on camera or off camera. Like Jet Li could play a bad guy. Tony Jaa plays a bad guy. All the other guys in the bottom of the list, they could all and have probably played bad guys. Demolition Man, Jason Statham has been a bad guy numerous times. Steven Seagal just is one. Jackie Chan, everyone loves him. I've never heard anyone say a bad thing about the dude. He's worked for so long, and he's famous to everyone. Even people that don't really watch martial arts movies, they still think of Jackie Chan probably first and foremost, other than the elephant in the room, which is Bruce Lee, our great honorable mention.
Yeah, and it's...
I know what you guys are thinking.
Yeah, I know. Leave it in the comments. Leave it in the comments. And if this is the time that you guys are going to write a review for the show, please.
We'll read it on air next week.
The thing about it is, he had a very limited amount of screen time, and he had it in an era when the technique to film these movies was different than it is today.
Yep.
Nothing that Bruce Lee ever got the opportunity to do on camera was quite at the level that even a single sequence of Tony Jaa in any of his movies, they don't on film compare. It's not to say that as athletes or martial artists, because that's not at all what we're saying. I think if you're going to talk about Bruce Lee's legacy, it's very similar to comparing like Elgin Baylor or like Jim Brown in their particular sports. When you watch the tape back, they don't look like they're moving as fast. They don't look as impressive. It's not as wonderful or cool. It's not as breathtaking. But that's not the only reason.
It's really tough because I love Bruce Lee so much. He's the reason why I got into martial arts, period. He is. And he's probably the reason why almost everyone on this list got into martial arts. It's probably why you guys are sitting there angry that he's an honorable mention. But there's also this thing about Bruce Lee, and God, it hurts me to say this, and I guess I'm the one that's going to have to take the bullet here. He's not as likable as these other guys that we're talking about. I love Bruce Lee, but I don't know if I like him that much. I don't know if I'd actually really want to hang out with Bruce Lee, whereas like I would definitely want to break bread with Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Tony Jaa, all those guys.
Yeah, it's like the weirdest part about watching Bruce Lee clips now is that they feel extra and almost like over-exaggerated. Like that thing that Jean-Claude does in Bloodsport when he gets the sand in his eyes, and he's like, like it's not that different than some of the looks on Bruce Lee's face after he's done with the movie. He's like,
yeah, there's just something about it. Like, it's not that and look, when you go back and you watch him, technically, the speed, his physique, all of those things, he is probably the most respected and the most important martial artist that has ever been on film. He paved the way for so many of these people.
Oh, I don't even think it's a probably.
Yeah, I mean, 100%.
Without a doubt, he's the most important martial artist ever in film. And I think there's a world in which this podcast, where it's just like he was the de facto one before we even started, and we considered it. But I think for all of the reasons that we talked about at the top of the show, even his acting ability, like even as an actor, I don't find him to be a bad actor, but I'd have never watched a Bruce Lee movie and found myself after the scene thinking the thing that really got me about that scene was how great of a performance that was.
Yeah, and like I'm thinking about the moment in Enter the Dragon where he kills the guy that kills his sister, and it looks like he's almost crying, but he's also like, I don't know if it's sweat or I don't know what they're trying to make it, and then he also is doing like a whoa, like one of those, which is awesome because it's his kind of trademark. But it kind of takes away from the moment of the fact that you just avenged your sister's death. And, you know, I think the reason why he isn't our number one is just because his career is so much shorter than these guys. And then when you talk about athleticism, when you look at someone like Tony Jaa, the things that he does, I don't know if anyone else on this list could do.
It's like Jackie Chan and Tony Jaa, I feel like the guys.
Yeah,
maybe. I mean, that's even that's hard to compare.
And even then, I feel like the amount of acrobatics that Tony Jaa does still far surpasses Jet Li and Jackie Chan, which I think is why he's on our list. Even though his career in martial arts might be just as short as Bruce Lee's in the sense of movies that you cared about and movies that you've watched, it feels wrong to say it, but I don't believe he should be in our top 3 greatest martial artists of all time.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where we may read your guys' angry comments.
Yeah, they'll be there.
And decide that we made a mistake here. But I think we spent quite a bit of time talking through the different options. And it just felt like a better move to talk about it as an honorable mention than to just make it the de facto one if we didn't 100% believe it by the rules we put in place. Because the point of the show is the best and the worst. It is science, guys. We are using scientific formulas to come up with this reasoning.
It's movie science, and I think to add on to what we were talking about, these moments that we saw, whether it's in The Protector, whether it's the ladder fight, whether it's Jackie Chan's bloopers, there's not many moments that I look back in Bruce Lee's career where I'm like, oh my God.
The
that
breathtaking
was
moment.
Insane.
And that's tough because, again,
A lot of filming. It's a lot of technical stuff.
And you compare it to, just like I said, to like famous athletes from their era. I guarantee you Jim Brown is amazing and was incredible as a running back and probably like is what every single running back today looks up to.
Yep.
But if you watch footage of Jim Brown right now and you show me footage of, I don't know, Adrian Peterson in his prime, if you show me footage of literal like Christian McCaffrey right now, it doesn't feel like we're looking at the same thing.
Because things evolve. And unfortunately for us, Bruce Lee is definitely of a much earlier generation, even though guys like Jackie Chan were in movies at the same time as him. So as much as it kind of hurts us to say, I think that's probably going to be one of the hottest takes we ever have on the best and the worst. That's our top 3. Jackie Chan number 1, Jet Li number 2, Tony Jaa number 3, with Bruce Lee as the greatest probably martial artist of all time who gets the honorable mention. He doesn't make the best. He maybe is the greatest, but he's not the best.
But he's not the best. He's not the best as of right now. So that's going to wrap up the episode, guys. Thanks for watching another episode of The Best and the Worst. Be sure to tune in next week for the next episode, which is the best and the worst David Fincher film of all time. And of course, if you were correct in your guess in these comments here on YouTube, we're going to shout you out on the show.
That's right. And we're also going to get to another set of shout outs here in just a moment. So remember, guys, subscribe here or follow, depending on what platform you're listening on. Leave us a review. We would love to read the reviews. We'd love to shout you out. And of course, rate us. It's very important to do all of those things to help the podcast grow. Even if you hate us for not giving Bruce Lee the number 1 spot, it gives you an opportunity to respond emotionally, if you'd like, to us. So that's going to do it for the best and the worst martial artist in film. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye, guys.
All right, a big time shout out to our generals in our Patreon. Patreon.com/Team Action is the best way to support us in what we're doing. And this is also a great place to get in on the conversation. Before we tape these episodes, we talk to our generals in the Action Army about their ideas of what makes a great martial artist, what makes a great Ryan Gosling film, and next week, what makes the best or the worst David Fincher film. And we'll start with Call Sign Kilmer, Quiz Show, Ripper, Demon King, Excalibur, Caddyshack, The Chosen One, Public Enemy Number 1, Kaiju, ACP, Freedom, Robin, Kimura, Moses, Galactus, Bartab, Party J, Congo, The Gray, Phantom, Deja Vu, 24601.
Call sign # Ladies Night, Ladies Man, JFTB, Wonderland, Quinn, Brosnan, Desperado, Outback, Da Vinci, The Slap, Entrapment, Stamos, Dante's Peak, Director, Top Gun, and Gundam, plus all of our past generals. A big time salute to you guys, and thank you so much for supporting the best and the worst. See you guys next week.